Johnny Carson revealed the 9 Golden Age guests who are actually evil. For 30 years as the host of The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson brought America's biggest stars into living rooms across the nation. His warm smile and easy laugh made audiences feel as if they were watching old friends catch up over coffee. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the audience went home, that smile often disappeared. According to those who worked closest with him, Carson kept a mental blacklist of guests he believed were truly awful human beings. A former producer who worked with him for over a decade revealed that Johnny was always professional on air. But during commercial breaks, he would sometimes turn to Ed and whisper that the person on stage should never be near a camera or a child. In his later years, Carson became more open about the celebrities he secretly despised throughout his career. The stories he shared with close friends painted a dark picture of beloved icons, who were nothing like the people the public adored. One of the most shocking revelations involved a famous actress who appeared sweet and gentle on his couch, but backstage had screamed so viciously that a young production assistant at security had to step in. Another story told of a beloved male star Carson caught doing something so disturbing in his dressing room that he nearly called the police. To Carson, these were not just difficult or demanding stars. He described them as truly dark individuals, predators, abusers, and manipulators protected by the entertainment industry for decades, while the world only saw their glamorous, carefully crafted public images. We need to understand why the very first name on Johnny Carson's secret list earned his deepest dislike in the story of the private backstage confrontation that no one has ever heard until now. Number 1. Frank Sinatra. The charming bully Johnny Carson could never stand. On screen, their chemistry seemed effortless. Whenever Sinatra appeared on The Tonight Show, the legendary crooner joked, told stories, and occasionally broke into song, while Carson smiled, laughed, and played the gracious host. To viewers at home, they looked like old friends, sharing an easy camaraderie. But off camera, the reality was far less friendly. Carson, according to those who knew him well, deeply disliked Sinatra, not for his immense talent, which he fully respected, but for the way Old Blue Eyes treated people when the spotlight wasn't on him. If he didn't sing, he'd be a mob enforcer, Carson once confided to a friend, as several biographies later confirmed. And sometimes I think he was both. Sinatra's visits to the show were infamous among the crew for the tension they brought. Staff members recalled that he never came alone, always surrounded by an entourage of 6 to 8 men. They weren't showbiz guys, one stagehand remembered. More like the kind of men you'd avoid in a dark alley. These men would fan out around the studio watching the staff, creating an uneasy atmosphere that one cameraman described as like being under surveillance. What disturbed Carson the most, however, was Sinatra's treatment of anyone he considered beneath him. During one taping in the early 1970s, a floor manager made the routine mistake of giving Sinatra the standard 3-minute warning before his segment. According to multiple witnesses, Sinatra grabbed the man by his tie, yanked him close, and growled, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The floor manager, a Korean War veteran in his 50s, was left visibly shaken, watching the incident unfold on a studio monitor from his office. Carson reportedly went pale and almost canceled Sinatra's segment on the spot. From that moment on, Johnny Carson's polite on-screen smile whenever Frank Sinatra appeared wasn't one of admiration. It was pure professionalism, masking a quiet disgust that never faded. Only a reminder from the producers about the ratings boost Sinatra would bring convinced Carson to move forward with the show. But tension between the two men didn't stop there. Another constant source of frustration was Sinatra's unreliability. He was notorious for canceling appearances at the last minute, sometimes even after arriving at the studio. On one occasion, just 2 hours before taping, he reportedly decided he wasn't in the mood and simply walked out. The most revealing moment of their strained relationship came during a commercial break. Sinatra made a crude remark about a female staff member's appearance, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Breaking his usual calm professionalism, Carson turned to him and said in a cold, measured tone, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." The air in the studio went still. Sinatra, stunned that anyone, even Johnny Carson, would dare challenge him, sat in silence. When the cameras came back on, both men wore their usual television smiles. But everyone behind the scenes could feel the chill. Carson's questions became shorter, his tone more detached. Once the taping ended, he reportedly told his producer, "I don't care how good his ratings are. Limit him to once a year maximum." For Carson, who rarely interfered in booking decisions, this was a powerful statement. He almost never banned guests. But Sinatra's arrogance and cruelty had crossed a line even Johnny couldn't ignore. If Frank Sinatra embodied the bullying side of celebrity power, the next name on Carson's mental blacklist showcased a different kind of difficulty: the overwhelming ego that refused to recognize boundaries. Number 2. Joan Crawford, the Hollywood queen with ice in her veins. When Crawford appeared on The Tonight Show in 1970, audiences saw the elegant legend they had adored for decades. With her flawless posture, immaculate style, and carefully practiced charm, she was the very image of old Hollywood glamour. But according to several members of The Tonight Show staff, the woman behind the camera was nothing like the one on screen. Years later, Carson reportedly told his biographer she was one of the coldest people I've ever interviewed. Talking to her was like talking to a beautiful statue. Nothing inside. The trouble began even before Crawford arrived at the studio. Her team had sent over a 4-page list of lighting and staging demands, so specific that the show's technical director kept a copy of it for decades. Everything had to be exact, recalled a former producer. The angle of her chair, the height of Johnny's desk, even the temperature of the studio, exactly 67, not 66, not 68. When Crawford finally arrived 3 hours before taping, she brought her own makeup crew. Despite the show already employing award-winning artists, what truly revealed her character was the way she treated people based on their importance. She practically curtsied to Johnny, a stagehand remembered. But when a young production assistant accidentally walked into her dressing room with a glass of water she'd requested, Crawford exploded in fury. That moment, witnesses said, showed exactly why Joan Crawford's name topped Johnny Carson's list. A woman who looked flawless on the outside, but carried an icy darkness just beneath the surface. According to several witnesses, Joan Crawford erupted into a tirade so vicious that everyone in the hallway froze in disbelief. She allegedly lashed out at the young assistant, a 20-year-old woman just starting her career, calling her a brainless little fool and sneering that she should try working in a brothel where incompetence might actually be useful. The young woman burst into tears and ran out of the room while Crawford furiously demanded that she be fired. Carson's producer refused, creating an undercurrent of tension that lingered through the entire taping. But the most chilling part of Crawford's appearance wasn't just how she treated the staff. It was the cold precision with which she switched personas the moment the cameras came on. She was like a machine pretending to be a woman, one producer recalled. Every response, every laugh, every supposedly spontaneous moment had been rehearsed to perfection. Nothing felt real. During commercial breaks, Crawford would instantly drop her smile, sit in complete silence with a blank expression, refusing to speak to anyone, only to come alive again the instant the red light flashed. Johnny Carson, known for making even the most nervous guests feel at ease, could find no real connection with her. After the show, he reportedly turned to Ed McMahon and said, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality." Years later, when Christina Crawford's memoir, Mommy Dearest, exposed Joan's alleged abuse of her adopted children, Carson wasn't surprised. Close friends said he simply nodded and remarked, "I saw who she really was in those few hours. I believe every word." But if Joan Crawford's icy control unsettled Carson, the next name on his list represented something even darker: raw power used to intimidate and threaten. Number 3. Orson Welles, the genius who thought rules didn't apply to him. During the Carson era, Welles appeared on The Tonight Show several times, captivating audiences with his booming voice, grand presence, and fascinating tales from his legendary career. Viewers saw a brilliant reckoner. Carson and his team saw something else. A man so consumed by his own legend that he seemed to believe the ordinary rules of television no longer applied to him. Never again. Carson reportedly said, after one particularly difficult taping, "That guy thinks he's still running Rome." The problems often started long before Welles ever set foot in the studio. According to several Tonight Show writers, he routinely rejected every question or topic the team had prepared. He told us our questions were pedestrian and obvious. One former writer recalled, he literally crossed them all out and handed back a blank page. That left Carson in the awkward position of having to interview one of cinema's greatest figures with no structure or guidance whatsoever. A near impossible task given Wells's habit of launching into endless meandering monologues that were nearly impossible to edit for time. During one appearance in the mid-19th, Wells was scheduled for a 7-minute segment. What happened next would prove that even Johnny Carson's patience had limits. During one particularly chaotic taping, Orson Welles stayed on Carson's couch for nearly 25 minutes, far beyond his allotted 7. He completely ignored every subtle cue Johnny used to signal that it was time to wrap up Johnny. Had a whole system, a director later explained. He'd tap his pencil shift in his seat, glance at the producer. All clear signs the segment was over. Welles saw them all and just kept talking. The result? 2 scheduled guests never made it to air that night. Wells's behavior off-camera was no better. Staff members recalled that he refused to address production assistants directly, instead speaking about them as if they weren't there. "Tell the girl, I need more water," he'd say. Ask the boy to fix the light, even when both people were standing right beside him. What frustrated Carson most, according to those close to him, was Wells's tendency to treat The Tonight Show as if it were his own production. He would bring props without warning, jump from topic to topic, and even try to direct the cameraman from his seat. He actually stood up once and started telling our camera operators which angles to shoot. A former producer remembered Johnny was furious. After that appearance, Carson turned to Ed McMahon and muttered, "Genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show." As a man who prided himself on precision and respect for television craft, Carson found Wells's disregard for time and structure especially infuriating. Publicly, he continued to praise Welles as one of cinema's great visionaries. Privately, however, he began to see him as a cautionary tale, proof that unchecked ego could overshadow even the greatest talent. But if Orson Welles embodied the challenge of containing an overblown personality, Carson's next guest was difficult for another reason entirely. Unpredictability. Number 4. Bette Davis, Hollywood's queen of verbal combat. When Bette Davis appeared on The Tonight Show, audiences saw the sharp, magnetic legend they adored, poised, witty, and brimming with stories from her, decades in film. But what viewers never saw were the moments before and after the cameras rolled. Moments when Davis's temper and sharp tongue turned the studio atmosphere ice cold. "She doesn't need a stage," Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon afterward. "She needs a courtroom. No one should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without a lawyer present." According to multiple Tonight Show staff accounts, her first offense came in the way she treated other guests. What happened next would prove that Bette Davis wasn't just a diva, she was a verbal force of nature. Even Johnny Carson struggled to contain. When Bette Davis appeared on episodes with multiple celebrities, chaos often followed. She had a habit of interrupting others mid-sentence, especially younger performers or female guests, and sometimes even turned her back to them on the couch. If someone else got a big laugh, a former talent coordinator recalled, you could practically see her fuming, already plotting how to take the spotlight back. Off camera, Davis's behavior was even harder to manage. She was known to request whiskey in her dressing room before going on stage. Not unusual for her generation, but her drinking often led to sharp, inappropriate remarks. Several women who worked on The Tonight Show during the 1970s later recalled that Davis occasionally used sexist and racist language, so harsh that it shocked even by the standards of that era. One makeup artist remembered offering her services only to be rejected with a cutting remark. "Find someone whose hands don't shake like they've just come off a 3-day drunk." Carson, who usually avoided direct conflict with guests, finally stepped in when Davis began berating a card operator for being too slow during rehearsal. "Johnny actually intervened," said a production assistant who witnessed it. He walked over and quietly said, "Miss Davis, on this show we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." Davis froze, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, then silently backed down. What made Davis so difficult for Carson wasn't just her attitude, It was the contradiction between her brilliance and her behavior. She was, without question, one of Hollywood's greatest talents, and Carson admired her work deeply. But after her final appearance in the early 1980s, he reportedly told his producer, "That's it. Life's too short to be verbally flogged by Bette Davis. No matter how many Oscars she's got, if Bette Davis's sharp-tongued targeted adults who could defend themselves." Carson's next troubling guest crossed into even darker territory, behavior toward young women that broke professional boundaries. Number 5. Mickey Rooney, the aging child star with wandering hands. Once the biggest box office draw in the world from 1939 to 1941, Rooney was Hollywood royalty, a living link to its golden age. His appearances on The Tonight Show should have been nostalgic tributes to a remarkable career. Instead, they became infamous among the crew for all the wrong reasons: erratic energy, occasional intoxication, and deeply inappropriate conduct. He thinks being short gives him permission to be a pervert. Carson reportedly told his producer, after one disastrous appearance in the mid-1970s. By then, in his mid-50s, Rooney had developed a reputation among female staff members for unwanted touching, crude jokes, and a total disregard for professional boundaries. Behavior that left even the unflappable Johnny Carson disgusted. According to numerous staff accounts, younger production assistants often asked to be reassigned whenever they learned. Mickey Rooney was scheduled to appear. He'd grab your hand when you brought him water, pull you a little too close, and start asking if you were married. One former assistant recalled of her experience in the late 1970s. If you tried to walk away, he'd hold on to your wrist just long enough to make you uncomfortable. Equally troubling was Rooney's apparent inability or refusal to recognize when he'd had too much to drink. Tonight Show employees claimed he appeared visibly intoxicated on at least 3 separate occasions, slurring his words and losing his train of thought mid. During one notorious 1977 appearance, he began sharing an anecdote about Judy Garland that turned inappropriate so quickly that Carson had to cut him off and abruptly change the subject. During the next commercial break, Carson reportedly turned to his producer and asked, "Is he drunk, or is this just who he is now?" What made Rooney especially difficult for Carson was the generational divide between them and the drastically different standards of behavior they represented. Born in 1920, Rooney came from an era of Hollywood where certain conduct toward women was tolerated, if not outright accepted. Johnny wasn't a saint, one longtime director explained, but he had very clear boundaries about professionalism. Rooney didn't seem to understand that those lines even existed. After one particularly uncomfortable taping, in which Rooney repeatedly made suggestive comments toward a young actress who was also a guest that night, Carson took the rare step of apologizing to her personally after the show. "I'd never seen Johnny so embarrassed by a guest's behavior," the director recalled. He told her, "That's not how professionals act on my show, and it won't happen again." And he meant it. From that point forward, Mickey Rooney's appearances became increasingly rare. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Carson reportedly insisted that any segment involving Rooney be pre-taped during the daytime, rather than broadcast live at night. Yet, as uncomfortable as Rooney's conduct could be, Carson's next difficult guest tested his patience in an entirely different way. Through a staggering list of demands so outrageous, they became legend among Tonight's Show staff. Number 6. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the diva who nearly drove Johnny Carson to the edge with her dazzling looks, thick Hungarian accent, and flirtatious wit. Zsa Zsa Gabor was a Tonight Show regular, appearing dozens of times throughout Carson's reign. To audiences, she was irresistible, glamorous, outrageous, and funny, turning jokes about her many marriages and lavish lifestyle into part of her charm. Behind the scenes, however, staff members told a very different story. According to multiple Tonight Show employees, Gabor was among the most demanding and difficult guests in the show's entire history. "I'd rather interview a cat," Carson reportedly joked after one particularly exhausting appearance. At least the cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and custom lighting. Her list of requirements started long before she even set foot in the studio. Former staff recalled that her standard dressing room setup included a temperature fixed precisely at 7, a vase of fresh orchids, never carnations, a bottle of Perrier water with exactly 3 ice cubes, and her own personal lighting technician flown in at the show's expense. She also insisted that no female guests under 40 appear on the same episode. Her writer read like a comedy sketch. One former talent coordinator laughed. The first time we saw it, we thought it had to be a joke. If even one detail was overlooked, Gabber reportedly refused to come out of her dressing room. Tapings were delayed, guests were left waiting, and the crew scrambled to meet her demands. One infamous incident became legendary. Among staff, Gabber arrived for a taping only to discover that the makeup department didn't have her preferred brand of foundation. Witnesses said she erupted into a shouting match with the head makeup artist, demanding someone be sent to Beverly Hills immediately to buy the correct product. Johnny actually had to step in. A former producer recalled, he called her directly and said something like, "Jonna, darling, you already look stunning, and we have a show to do. Let's save the makeup crisis for another day." What truly infuriated Carson wasn't just her behavior. It was the chaos she caused for everyone else. Other guests were kept waiting, production schedules were wrecked, and crew members had to work late to make up for the delays. After one appearance in which Gabber arrived 40 minutes late and then complained about how she'd been introduced, Carson reportedly turned to his executive producer and said, "Next time she wants to come on, tell her we've renamed it The Tonight Show starring Zsa Zsa Gabor, and I'll happily play her sidekick." Despite the frustration she caused, Gabber kept being invited back. Proof that, when the cameras were rolling, even Johnny Carson couldn't deny she was television gold. But if Gabber's diva demands were exhausting, Carson's next troublesome guest presented a new kind of unease, one that had less to do with vanity and everything to do with personal boundaries. Number 7. Shelley Winters. The unpredictable storm Johnny Carson never quite knew how to handle. A two-time Academy Award winner with a career that spanned from glamorous ingenue roles to gritty, character-driven performances, Winters should have been a perfect Tonight Show guest. She was experienced, articulate, and full of Hollywood history. But according to those who worked behind the scenes, she was also one of the most volatile and unpredictable guests Carson ever faced. Shelley doesn't talk. She detonates, Carson reportedly said after one particularly intense interview. To the Tonight Show crew, Winters became infamous for her inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to adapt to the show's lighthearted tone. Instead of funny anecdotes or promotional chatter, she often launched into impassioned political speeches or startling personal confessions that left Carson struggling to keep the segment on track. During one appearance in the mid-1970s, a simple question about her latest film spiraled into a 5-minute monologue about government corruption and media hypocrisy. Johnny was a master of conversation control, recalled a former director, but with Shelley, it was like trying to steer a tornado. Once she started, all you could do was hang on and hope. She stopped before the next commercial break. Her unpredictability extended far beyond her words. Winters had a reputation for sudden physical outbursts. One particularly famous example came from a British talk show appearance where she threw a glass of whiskey at an actor, Oliver Reed's face, after he made sexist remarks. That story circulated quickly through television circles and made the Tonight Show staff extra cautious whenever she was scheduled. We actually removed anything breakable from the set before she came on. One stage manager admitted, if it could be thrown, it disappeared, despite the tension she caused. Many of Carson's colleagues said Winters' volatility came not from cruelty or arrogance, but from sincerity. She was passionate about her politics, her beliefs, and her sense of justice, and saw every platform as a chance to say something meaningful, even if it made others uncomfortable. Though visibly uneasy during her more heated moments, respected that authenticity. After one particularly fiery appearance in which Winters criticized the Vietnam War, he reportedly turned to his producer and said, "I might not want to spend a weekend with her, but I'll give her this. She believes every word she says." Shelley Winters might have tested Johnny Carson's patience, but she also reminded him, and everyone watching, that even in the world of polished entertainment, some guests refuse to play by the rules. Shelley Winters' fiery unpredictability may have tested Johnny Carson's patience, but his next difficult guest pushed him to a level of discomfort that went beyond personality clashes. This time, it wasn't about ego or volatility. It was about ideology. Carson's growing unease centered around one of Hollywood's classic beauties, whose political views and treatment of others behind the scenes left a lasting mark on him. Number 8. Jane Russell, asterisk, the bombshell whose politics Johnny Carson couldn't stomach. Known for her sultry screen presence in films like The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Jane Russell was one of the defining sex symbols of the 1940s and 1950s. Her glamour, wit, and status as a Hollywood legend made her an obvious choice for The Tonight Show. But after only a few appearances in the early 1970s, she virtually vanished from Carson's guest list, and insiders say it wasn't by coincidence. According to former Tonight Show staff, Carson became increasingly uncomfortable with Russell's outspoken political views, which he felt crossed the line from opinion into intolerance. Though Carson himself leaned Republican for much of his life, he was careful to keep the show politically neutral and inclusive. Johnny didn't mind guests with different perspectives. One longtime producer explained what he couldn't stand was when those opinions turned into cruelty or prejudice. Multiple staff members recalled that Russell would make harsh, often disparaging comments about LGBTQ+ individuals working on the show. During one early 70s taping, she allegedly refused to let a gay makeup artist do her touch-ups, demanding someone else instead. Even more troubling, according to a talent coordinator, was an incident involving actor Rock Hudson. Russell reportedly refused to appear on the same episode as him, making insulting remarks about his sexuality, which, though not publicly known at the time, was no secret within Hollywood circles. Carson, who counted several gay friends and staff among his close circle, was deeply offended. The coordinator said he just wouldn't tolerate discrimination, not in his studio. The final straw reportedly came in 1973 during a commercial break. Russell, in casual conversation, made dismissive remarks about recent civil rights legislation. Statements overheard by several crew members and quickly relayed to Carson, though her comments were never captured on tape. They sealed her fate. From that point on, Jane Russell was quietly but permanently removed from the Tonight Show roster. For a host who rarely interfered in guest bookings, especially with someone of Russell's stature, the decision spoke volumes. It was one of the few times Johnny Carson drew a hard personal line, not over fame, not over ratings, but over principle. Johnny Carson had faced every kind of guest during his 3 decades hosting the Tonight Show, but his strongest dislike was reserved for one man, whose public charm hid a darker reality. Number 9. Jerry Lewis. Lewis was a comic genius and humanitarian, the energetic entertainer who brought laughter to generations and raised millions for charity through his annual Yet behind the scenes, according to multiple Tonight Show insiders, Lewis was one of the most demeaning and arrogant celebrities ever to appear on the program. He's what happens when ego outruns talent, Carson reportedly told a colleague after a particularly unpleasant encounter. During one infamous taping, Lewis repeatedly interrupted both Carson and the other guests, dominating the conversation and even reaching over to adjust Carson's tie without permission, a gesture that visibly irritated the usually composed host. His behavior toward the staff was even worse. He refused to learn anyone's name, instead addressing them by their job titles, and once exploded at a camera operator for breathing too loudly during rehearsal. What disgusted Carson most was the contrast between Lewis's public image as a champion for children and his private treatment of people who couldn't help his career. Johnny's skin crawl, a producer recalled. After Lewis's final appearance in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly said simply, "Never again," effectively banning him from the show. Years later, Carson summarized his feelings with rare bluntness. In a town full of phonies, he stands out as truly hateful, and that takes some doing. Carson's private blacklist, which included stars like Joan Crawford, Frank Sinatra, Orson Welles, Bette Davis, Mickey Rooney, Zach Abber, Shelley Winters, Jane Russell, and Jerry Lewis, offers a revealing look at Hollywood's golden age beneath its glamorous surface. For 30 years, every major celebrity passed through Carson's studio, giving him a unique view of who was genuine and who merely played the part. He wasn't motivated by gossip or grudges. He simply couldn't tolerate cruelty, especially toward people with less power. As one longtime director explained, Johnny had a simple test. How did they treat the pages, the assistants, the camera guys? That told him everything. In the years after his death, many of Carson's private judgments were proven right, as reports of abuse, arrogance, and misconduct by some of these stars became public. His unspoken blacklist reminds us that behind the smiles and bright lights of Hollywood's golden age were real people. Some inspiring, others deeply flawed. As Carson himself once said, the camera doesn't just add 10 pounds, it adds a layer of fiction. His greatest gift wasn't just making America laugh each night, but seeing through that fiction to the truth underneath,